right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Marilyn McGreer, and I am currently a retired licensed practical nurse. So I'm not in the active workplace any longer. I retired 2021. So it's been a couple years ago now. And I'm really enjoying it. I can get up. I do at a certain time every day. I have a routine, but I no longer have to worry about being on duty for 7. In my work life, I had to be up at 5 to be out the door by no later than 6, to be at work for 6:30, quarter to 7, to be on duty. And so I worked as a bedside nurse for quite a while, and then the Lord opened up opportunities for me as I continued to add to my education, because LPNs, it's a 2-year diploma, but I went on to get a Bachelor of Science degree in home economics, and then I was able to no longer having to be do the bedside care, but then I was promoted into a leadership position. So I won't go into all the details there, but I did that for quite a while, and at one of the post-secondary institution in Edmonton, one of the public ones, and I don't want to name it because of what I'm going to be saying, but it became toxic after a while, and the reason being is because we were using, like, each college was able to use their own curricula, I guess, but over time, Alberta Health decided that they wanted to standardize care and programming, that type of thing. So colleges were then forced to sit around what they call the round table, excuse me. They evergreened it later, and that was one of our tasks, is to attend these meetings in Edmonton on a regular basis. And we had to be there with the deputy minister, health ministers, and people of that, very high up in the food chain. And it was stressful. It became so stressful. It was stressful internally as well as externally, because the staff were really upset. Some of them had been at that college for many, many years before me, and they had worked really hard at refining that program, and they were not happy to see it go. So I became the dartboard between the staff and the internally and outside. And oh my, it was just overwhelming to try to cope, to hear their woes, about the changes, and at the same time to try and work with the various government officials. And it was a task to just try and keep a smile. Eventually, I just could not cope. It was really, really awful. And to be honest, I ended up having to go on stress leave for a while. And during that time, I thought, oh Lord, what am I going to do? Do I want to go back? What do I want to do? During that time, what was very interesting, though, is the Lord made a way so that a healthcare book company approached me just before I left, and asked if I would be part of a book review and revision. And so, long story short there, I said yes. And that was what I did during that time off. And I had to do this alone, and that was good. I was glad that I didn't have to encounter the staff, because it was just too much. So I worked from home and got this job done over a year, and it became published in 2010, and it's on the market right now. That was my workplace stress. And I look back and I think, I don't know how I did it, except to say that it was the Lord, because I learned to pray, get my strength from him. But I did things like I did a lot of meditation early mornings to help me, and I use scripture, and I found my strength, um, there. I won't go into the spiritual part yet because I have, as a spiritual leader, but I'll let someone else have an opportunity to share that. But just to share my workplace stress. And
Wow.
so I'm happy to be retired. I really am, and I'm enjoying every moment of it.
I was going to ask you that question, actually, if you're happy to be a retiree.
Absolutely. I
So,
give back to the community by volunteering. I do. I volunteer, during COVID, I volunteered for them, but I no longer want to be in paid employment. I think I've paid my dues, and I'm happy to be where I am today.
okay, that's really interesting. I have a lot of questions for you, but I'll wait so that somebody else can have the floor. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sister Marilyn. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot there. Somebody else want to jump in now and tell us about your, yes, go
I
ahead.
could just jump in. My name is Joy Johnson Green, and it's interesting that I'm talking about this issue of burnout. And I chuckle because when I was going to do my doctorate dissertation, I wanted to do it on something completely different. And the Lord led me to, he said, no, what you want to do it on is going to be easy. I want you to tackle this issue. And so I actually did my doctorate dissertation on the use of the spiritual disciplines in preventing and recovering from burnout from spiritual leaders.
Oh my goodness.
But I've worked in the area before going into full-time ministry. I worked in the area of domestic violence prevention for probably about 35 years. And for some of those years, I was bivocational. So I was pastoring full-time and working in that area. And it's a very stressful, very fulfilling area, but a very stressful area. And we always said that the shelf life of people that work in domestic violence prevention is about 2 years. But early on in my career, I graduated from university at 22 and I was going to save the world. Boy, that was a joke. I quickly learned that there was one savior of the world and it wasn't me. But I remember working as an outreach worker. My earliest experience with burnout, I was working as an outreach worker, and we just had too many families. We just had way too many families, and no one comes to you in domestic violence and say they're having a good day. Like, it's always more crisis and danger and violence. And so I remember I was going to go see a client, and I had my briefcase, and I was running, and I put the briefcase on top of my car and I drove away. Like, I just kept right on driving. I forgot the briefcase was up there. And when I got to the client, I thought, I wonder where my briefcase is. This is very interesting. And so then I called back to the office, and the receptionist said, Joy, did you lose something? I said, I don't think I lost a lot of things. What? And lo and behold, like halfway through the client's house, my briefcase had fallen off the car. Client files, which I wasn't supposed to have in the briefcase, was there. My address list was there, blowing down the street. I thought, oh dear. So someone had seen all this paper, recognized that this is not garbage, and it put it together, collected everything, saw the address, and they put it together in a shop in Safeway kind of bag. And I went and picked it up. And I remember going to pick it up with tears, and my gift is not crying. I don't have the gift of tears, but I was so overwhelmed. I went and I picked up the bag, and I drove back to the office, and I said to my supervisor, I'm going home and I don't know when I'm coming back. And I was off for 3 months. I just couldn't. I realized I was completely burnt out. So that was sort of my first experience of burnt out, and just took the time, just needed to take the time and reassess what I could do and what I couldn't do. And, just really begin to assess where my strength was and where it wasn't. And the fact that there's one savior of the world, and it's not me. Sister Sharon, when you spoke at the beginning about we live very busy lives and we're able to juggle everything's, I got to say that I'm not quite there. I haven't quite figured out how to juggle everything, I think, especially being in full-time ministry. And I guess we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But one of the things I had learned in doing my dissertation is like how many pastors were saying, you know, I would quit if I could, because they were completely exhausted. They were complete, and I was surprised. They said they don't have time to pray. So here, people are looking to them and consider them spiritual leaders, and they were like, "Where's the door? I want to exit." That was very surprising to me. I didn't expect that, because of course you don't see that as a congregant. But anyhow, I won't take up all the airtime. I'm really interested in hearing what other people have to say on this topic. So I'm going to maybe just turn it over to you, Krista.
Thank you for that. And I do have a lot of questions for you as well, so be prepared. Go ahead, Krista.
So, just listening to the first two shares, I think one thing that stands out is right from the get-go is that we're all frontline workers. And when I say frontline workers or light workers, I mean we are people that don't just view our work as a job. I feel the synergy here is that we feel like we're doing our sole purpose or our calling in our daily work, and it's a beautiful thing, but it can also be a challenging realization in light of where we're at in this juncture in our civilization as a whole. My name is Krista, and I've been an educator for 30 plus years, and I went into it with the intention of wanting to enlighten or change the world, or be a part of that impetus in changing the world. And it's a big calling. And something that stood out, Joy, in your share is that I'm not the savior of the world, but it often feels like when we start out, we're full of this fresh and lively energy that says, yes, I'm unstoppable, and I've got this, and I can do all these things. But that can inadvertently be the downfall too, in that we are human. And so I guess when I started to really know that burnout was affecting me was post-COVID. So I worked at an institution in Edmonton that I will not name, and was, blessed to have work throughout the whole time period. But all of a sudden it was like, here, you're online. Here, you have to learn this skill set in a very short period of time. Oh, guess what? It's admirable to be working 10 plus hours a day and weekends now. And all of a sudden there's this new normal. And I found myself getting more and more angry. And the anger was not strategic in a sense. It was just banging all over the place. And, it's like banging against the system, going down with the sickness, but recognizing that it's bigger than me. And so I also was very blessed this year. I'm not close to retirement. I'm also a single parent, which also puts me in a very delicate situation, because it's like finding a work-life balance in a profession that never really has a work-life balance, and now it's completely out of whack, but yet still needing to stay the course and maintain a living so that I can raise my daughter. And so I did end up going on medical leave as well this year, and shifted into a job that I thought was going to be easier workload wise. And it was, but after only a short period of time, I found that anger coming back. And I guess maybe that anger represents, to me, God's voice, or my soul crying out saying, this is not right. This is a violence against self. And it may not only come from overwork, but what I found in the recent job that I just left, just officially walked away from in the past week, was the violence of inconsideration, in terms of upper management not recognizing how structural inefficiencies and lack of care from the part of that management can then lead to exhaustion and burnout, because again, banging one's head against the wall. So at this point, spiritually, what is my medicine? My medicine is connecting with people who also put their understanding of God at the heart of their work, but also self-love and compassion, saying, okay, I'm a servant of God and what I do matters, but I also matter, and my family matters, my time, my energy, my health matter. And recognizing now that assertiveness is a virtue. And I would say that, Christ would applaud assertiveness and say, you're standing up for justice, personal justice. So using that as my barometer.
Wow. Let me ask all of you this question. In all of what you've all shared, there's so much to consider. There's so many layers to what you've all said. And what my takeaway from all of that, and thank you, by the way, Krista, is two words just popped into my mind: self-preservation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to anyone? Self-preservation. And one of the questions that I had asked previous was, who is responsible for your mental health?
I think I'm responsible for my own mental health with God's help, because during my work years, and I worked for a long time, I mean, I'm quite happy to share that I'm now in my 60s. I probably don't look it, but I am, and I'm quite happy about that. But that's because I believe with the help of the Lord, I've had to learn over time to just guard my heart and to take care of myself physically, emotionally, like, all of that. I think of myself as a whole person and not just, in one part. It took me a while to catch that, because in my early years of work, I mean, I've been married for almost 40 years. It will be next year. And all along there, I've worked a long time. So I've been married since I was in my 20s and had children and had to raise them. I've worked nights, I've worked evenings, done all of that, come home from work after working 8 hours. I refused to work 12-hour shifts. I just couldn't manage that. I tried, but it wouldn't work. Just come in for a while and sleep maybe a couple hours and then have a shower, get ready, and off to church I would go. And I did that for a long time. And then I thought, whoa, I am not going to survive. So to answer your questions, I believe I've learned to take care of myself with the help of the Almighty.
So so many questions come to mind from everything you guys keep saying. But before I move on to the next question, I'd like to hear from Joy as well as Krista in terms of my last question.
Sister Sharon, I am learning. Sister Marilyn, I listen to you with great envy. And I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn from my other sisters that are online. I am learning that I am responsible for my own mental health. I think that, intellectually, I know that. I'm going to have to take care of me. People will always have something else for you to do. There will always be another demand. But, I give myself these messages often that is counterintuitive to mental health. And so, oftentimes I want to say, well, there's so many demands and there's so much, and there is a lot of demands, there's no question, but I'm learning that this is not going to happen, Joy, unless you make it happen. Like, no one's going to make this happen for you. You are going to have to take full responsibility for your own wellness, for your own mental wellness. And in order for you to accomplish what you believe God has called you to accomplish, or what is in your heart, because I love people, like it's a two-edged sword, right? There's a cost for caring. But I'm learning. I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm learning that I am responsible. Ultimately, I am responsible for my own mental health, and I have to not just say that or intellectually know that, but I have to be able to download that in my spirit, and then let that knowledge actually guide my behaviors.
Mm-hmm. But what I guess I should wait and hear from Krista. Well, I think, Krista, you basically said, you virtually said, you are aware that your mental health is paramount and you need to take care of that first. And you've learned that over time because of what you've just experienced. You can add to that because I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I want to move on to the next question if you've got nothing further. Because I think,
I think I would just like to say that a lot of the times we sit back and we think that the organization that we work for has our back in that regard. And if you work for a large institution, a lot of the times they'll say it, right? And they'll say it again and again, but they don't back it. And so I realized after a while that there was nobody coming in to rescue me. There's no, knight on the white horse with the armor, going to swoop in and scoop me up and whisk me away. That I'm it. I'm the one I've been waiting for. And it actually is freeing, even though at certain times it can be very daunting to think, wow, I have my back. But then I always repeat, God has my back. So it's not like we truly are alone. I believe that the help is always there. It's just a question of asking, requesting it, and having faith and going from there.
right. And I was thinking about emotional intelligence. We talked about that recently, Marilyn. I believe we talked about that recently. A lot of times there's a lack of emotional intelligence because people do experience burnout and we don't see it because we're thinking fiscal, right? We're thinking, these things must be satisfied, but we're not looking at the people who are actually taking and making your corporation or your institution, the wheels turn the way that they are turning. We're not looking at how it's impacting you mentally, physically. And so that's why I'm asking, where does self-preservation come in? Who's responsible for that? Question I have for everybody is, did any of you feel any amount of guilt in terms of when you did feel burnout and you had to walk away? Joy, you said, I can't do this anymore, Marilyn. And Krista, you said, I have to walk away. Did you feel any amount of guilt?
Survivor guilt, 100%. 100%. Yes, I'm currently sitting with that and thinking like, I just walked away from a cohort of students that came to me for everything. And I left them behind. Yeah, I do feel a lot of guilt, but I also think that, we are not responsible. I'm not responsible for how other people choose to respond to what is. And I think that even in situations where there's abrupt transition or things that could be potentially upsetting to those that we serve, this could also be a part of their journey and their, life's way or God's way of fostering resilience. Because nobody said this was supposed to be easy, right?
Okay, thank you for that. Marilyn, Joy, any sense of guilt, any feeling of remorse, or I shouldn't have?
I think that anger is a secondary emotion, and that was my first place that I went.
Okay.
Was to anger. Well, I felt angry. First of all, that there was no record, like I was expecting the organization to look after me, and that was a mess. But I actually was expecting that to happen, because here we cared for broken people, we cared for abused women. We were supposed to be an organization of caring. And then in the midst of that, here was someone that was just completely wiped out. So my first response was anger, and anger at myself too. Like, how did you let this happen? Like, did you not hear the bell ringing down the track, sort of thing? And so, yeah, I was angry, but once I was sort of through the door, I didn't get anything off my desk. I just said, I'm gone. I'll never know. I don't know when I'm going to come. And that was early in my career. I mean, I'm 55 now. That's probably when I was maybe 25, 27. But I didn't feel the guilt. I just felt mad. I felt mad that I felt like this had been done to me, and I was not wise enough not to let it happen.
Okay. Marilyn?
Yeah, I think for me, the emotion that I felt very disappointed, let down. And I'm a very caring person, as well as all of us here, right? And I just felt like, how could you do this to me? That was sort of my, and I was very broken. I was broken for a while. I was at home and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And I felt like, okay, I don't think I want to go back. So what I did do was I invited the staff that I worked with immediately to come to my home for lunch. And not all of them came, but some of them came. They were expressing the fact, that they were missing me, and that made my ego feel good. I have to say.
Absolutely.
It did. But I was really broken. I was really disappointed because, at the beginning, a big public institution, you go, they have the human resources, you sign documents and they tell you these are the core values. And one of the core values is that, we believe in people. Well, the people are the staff as well as the students, right? That type of thing. And I was feeling like, well, I'm one of those people, but I don't feel like you care about me. That, here I've been there all this time. I've worked really hard. We've, this program is off the ground, and, and it's doing well. And here I've had a breakdown. And do you care? I just didn't feel that. I didn't feel that. And I was expecting to get, I don't know, some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like some kind of bouquet or something from the higher up. There was a point where I even tried to have a meeting because I was so sure that they were going to, want to know and hear what I had to say, but that did not happen. So I was very disappointed for a long time, but somehow God just turned it around. Like I said, this book company came and, invited to do this job. And then that started to kind of ease. And do you know what? I ended up not going back to that position. They offered me a buyout, and I took it. And that's how I dealt with that. But for the longest time, my disappointment, honestly, and I have to be truthful in the presence of the Lord, it was turning into hatred. Like, I hate this place. And even to hear their name just sick. But I've dealt with that.
Well, it's almost like you feel resentment because the reward was not there based on your what you described and the feelings that you had and the symptoms, and it was not recognized. It was not recognized. Is that correct? You had to sort of bring it to the attention.
I did not feel like that my contribution. I mean, before leaving, I mean, we were our area, our department was voted in as we got some kind of acknowledgement and a silver plaque which they gave to me, and that was okay while I was there. But they, I don't know. I just didn't feel like they met my expectation. Like they didn't seem to. Yeah, and that bothered me for a very long time.
And that's an interesting word, expectation. On the other end, there is an expectation.
Yeah, that's right.
I think Krista might want to is probably sitting at the edge of her seat because she was rewarded for her contribution with a mug.
Oh,
Maybe I
We're
shouldn't
not
have
even,
brought that up.
hey, we're not even sure that the mug was not being regifted from some other
Okay,
area of
all right,
life.
so we won't go there. We won't go there. Okay, so is there anything else that any of you would like to share further about the temporal side? Because I think we've exhausted that, and we understand that burnout definitely was an issue in all of your situations. And it's interesting that the way that you all left your positions was pretty much the same for the same reasons. Am I right?
You know,
Making that?
I did go back to work, Sister Sharon.
Oh,
I
okay.
did go back to work and went back to the same job, and really was able, I found a voice, right, to be able to say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to do no more. And it was really interesting because I suddenly became free. I
Wow.
became free in that I lost my fear of being fired, which was very freeing for me. So I could just, when it dawned on me that nobody was going to look after me and I have to look after myself, my fear of repercussions for whatever actions I took went out the window. And so I could assert myself and say, this is what I'm going to do. And I just had no fear of being fired or being reprimanded. I was always respectful, but I was like, I am going to set these boundaries. And I went back and stayed at that job probably, I mean, altogether, I was there for 20 years, and it happened in the first maybe 5 years of my employment. And so I went back and stayed an additional 15 years and did well and left on my own accord. But in a way, it was very freeing when I realized, wait a minute, they're not going to look after you, Pure Joy. They're not going to look after you. And my anger was in some way a catalyst. It was a catalyst for just liberation, not being afraid that they're going to fire me if I said, sorry, I can work with X amount of family and I can't work with no more, and then stop talking and let the silence do the heavy lifting.
So that experience was beneficial to you in the long run.
It was.
Absolutely. I was just looking at some of the articles that we had shared before, and it lists, I won't go into it in detail, but I just want to list some of the possible causes of job burnout. And I think I've heard some of that this evening: lack of control, unclear job expectations, dysfunctional workplace dynamics, lack of social support, and work-life imbalance. Any of that ring a bell? Yes.
Yeah, I'm chuckling in the background because so in the last year, I will have walked away from 2 positions now. One was a 10-year permanent contract with a very well-established college in the city environment, without naming names, and this other one just recently, which is kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of benefits and pay. But I think 2 of those things jumped out at me. So unclear job description and poor management overall in the current place that I worked at. And then the other one, yeah, everything was clear and organized, but the workload was off the charts. And I think walking away from the permanent contract with all the benefits and bells and whistles has taught me that it's quite easy to walk away when it comes down to my health and wellness, because if you don't have your health and wellness, it doesn't matter how much they pay you, it doesn't matter if they give you paid medical leave and all those other things. By the time you're on paid medical leave, it's too late. And so on a physical level, the disease is chronic and not always easy to reverse. And so I would say I tune into the mental and emotional and spiritual dis-ease now, and act to ensure that it doesn't get to that state anymore, because the money and all that isn't worth it in the long run. Time that we don't spend with family and friends,
Mhm.
working on weekends, all those kind of things. You can't reclaim those things. Once they're
Mhm.
gone, they're gone.
I appreciate that. I was the study that Mayo, is it the Mayo Clinic? They had a list of consequences of job burnout.
Mm.
And I was listening to all three of you, and I'm sort of checking off the things that you've shared. And some of, I'll just go through this really quickly: excessive stress, fatigue, insomnia, sadness, anger, irritability, alcohol or substance misuse, heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and vulnerability to illnesses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the article ends with handling job burnout. And I think this sort of brings into relevance where Joy had shared that she was evaluating her options when she went back. And then she lost her fear of being let go.
Yeah.
And her ability to speak to, was it upper management that you addressed your concerns with, Joy?
Yes, I just told them here's what I was going to do and no more, in very respectful way, but
Right.
just say that this is the limit.
So if I was to say to all of you, ask you a question, to anyone listening who might be experiencing some of the symptoms of burnout that you've described, and the feeling and the result and the consequences of what you experienced, what would you say to them in a sentence on how to address, how to deal before they got to that chronic point where they just melted like that candle? What would you say to them?
Oh. Hmm.
Besides, quit your job.
Hmm. That's a hard one to really answer, I think. But I think with hindsight, looking back now, I mean, you go through it, you don't necessarily recognize what is happening to you. You just know that you're unhappy, you don't feel well, but you're not, like maybe I'm speaking for myself. In my case, I didn't really have a handle on it. So if you can take time out, like, I know that sometimes people take sabbaticals before they actually crash. That's a good thing to do. When you're new in your career, you're so eager and you're also very worried because, like Sister Joy said, you don't want to be let go for many reasons, right? You're just starting out and you're trying to establish yourself, find your way. But if you can do that, take time out. And even and if you can work it so you can take time away, even without pay, I think it's worth it in the long run.
Okay. Anyone else? Advice to somebody who needs to know how to cope, how to manage?
I would, this is going to sound very carte blanche, and I don't mean it to say that, but
Okay.
I think people need to know that they're worth more than what they're experiencing. Like, you're just of more value than this. And that better is there for you. When I was when I was leading the organization, I would say to the staff, which is counterintuitive, like, why would you say this to your staff? But I would say to them, listen, your family, your health is more important than this job. Because the reality is, and I learned this, if you leave a job today, in 2 weeks, they don't remember your name. like that's the reality. So we're killing ourselves. We question our own value. We question our own competency, because that happens when you're burnt out. What am I doing wrong? I'm not able to cope. I can't do my job. All those negative things come. And the reality is we're killing ourselves for an employment that in 2 weeks, people are not even going to remember your name. Like, you are worth more than, you deserve better than this. You don't have to sit in this. This is not like God's will for your life, for you to suffer on this job. Because sometimes we just think that this is the best there is, and somehow we serve a God that's just into our suffering, and we just have to persevere. There comes a point where you say, you know what, I deserve better than this. Like, I am important enough to not have to be going through this. I'm worth more. I'm more valuable than this. And that is a hard message when you're in the throes of things. It's a hard message.
Right. True enough. Thank you. Krista, a final.
Yeah, this is not so much of a spiritual line, but it's a very apt one. There's a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bleep. And I think all too often what I've done in my life is harbor that, what are the neighbors going to think? Like, what are people going to think of me if I leave this job? And then, it looks like there's something wrong with me that I would walk away. And so I think part of the practice is detachment and just saying, I'm putting the air mask on myself first. Right? The plane is going down or the ship is going down. I'm going to grab that life preserver so that I can then potentially be of use to others. But it really boils down to trusting that inner voice. And I believe the inner voice is connected to God, and that God speaks to us when we're still and when we trust. And if that voice is saying, get out, danger, danger, I'm going to listen to it from now on.
Wow. I'm learning a lot from all of you. And I know listeners are definitely going to be benefited by the things that we've shared, the experiences that you've shared. I want to move on to the spiritual side of things. And I know that, Krista, you are not a minister, you're not in ministry per se, but I believe your brother is a pastor.
Yeah.
So you probably have some insight as to how he's coping. And a lot of what
it's unfortunate that he's not here, because burnout is something that he's experiencing in his life. So I'm going to send him the recording so that he can hear this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll send you the link. I wanted to talk about, I like to do the comparison. I always like to do that because I think everything spiritual has a temporal side to it and vice versa. I really believe that. And so if you don't mind sharing with me and those who will be listening, share as much as you can, delicately, or however you feel, you can, to whatever degree. Do you feel that spiritual burnout is a chronic, but a very hidden, what would I call that now? The articles that I've sent to you all, I was surprised that so many pastors and spiritual leaders said, I quit. I can't handle this. And a lot of it was attributed to the pandemic. How do you feel about this?
I'm actually not that surprised, Sister Sharon. I'm not that surprised. I think that depending on the denomination, it is more or less hidden. I think that certain denominations look at mental health differently from others. And in some denominations, the idea of burnout equates lack of faith, lack of spirituality, lack of commitment, lack of everything. And so, certain denominations, people are just not going to come out and say I'm burnt out because, it's going to be equivalent to the word backslidden. That we use, like faith.
I hear Marilyn moaning in the background.
Oh my goodness.
I think I'm not surprised. I mean, when I did my doctoral dissertation, it was across sector. It was, not just apostolic, it was Baptist and Methodist and everybody. But I'm not surprised that there's people that, they said if they could quit, they would. And I think it's because the idea of mental health and being healthy is something that in some denominations don't talk about.
There's an expectation that if you are in ministry, you can't go there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Burnt out. What does that mean? You're not praying enough. You're not fasting enough. You're not seeking God. Stay in the word. Glory. It's the message. I don't know where the message comes from, right? But that's the message that we somehow tell ourselves. And I think that for being in a leadership role, it's a very isolated role. Right? Like, when you are at work on the job, you have someone that you can go to and you can talk to and stuff like that about what you're going through. But there's this expectation that suddenly you're in ministry and, all of those needs are gone or something. I don't know where the message comes from. But there is this expectation that you just can manage whatever comes. And we know as spiritual leaders, we're not trying to do this on our own. We know for sure we cannot do this on our own. But there's elements of spiritual leadership that has the potential to set you up for burnout if you're not really tapped, if you don't find a way to tap into the spiritual disciplines and how do you define success? And that's a whole other story. Sometimes our expectations of ourselves is not even what God expects. Like we expect more from ourselves than God expects from us.
Well, I appreciate that you being candid about it, being a pastor as well, and able to say that freely. I think there was a story in the Old Testament, Moses, was it?
Yep.
Moses and he was overwhelmed, and his
Yeah.
father-in-law
Yeah.
gave him good advice and said, delegate.
Right. Yeah.
So I think sometimes spiritual leaders present themselves as if they are infallible anyways. So when you are tired and you're exhausted and you need to run away and hide, we're surprised. So some of that is self-inflicted. Would you agree?
I think Sister Joy said it because in some denominations, we just don't take holidays. Like I remember someone saying, well, what is that? Like, as if to say you're just called to be at work 24/7. You're always on duty. Like you don't take time out. And I mean, we clearly know that's wrong.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is I understood what she said, but contributing to that as well is the way that you present yourself as if you are infallible and you are, you can do all things for all people. You're here because God placed you here, and there's no such thing. We don't have an expectation because how you purport it. And so when you do need a break and you are unavailable, we are offended.
Well, I don't know. Like,
does that make sense?
It makes sense in a way, but it's just like when you think about men who are abused, right? Men who are abused don't come forward and say they're abused. Why? Because our society does not give them permission to come forth and say they're abused, right? That's why. It's not because they want to pretend they're strong. It's not because they want to say this doesn't happen. Is that there needs to be a permission, and I put that in air quotes. There needs to be a permission given for men who are the victims of domestic violence to come forward. Right. In the same way, I think congregants, and I'm not blaming congregants, but I think sometimes they see us, as sort of Jesus Jr., right?
Yes.
And like oftentimes and this is something I struggle with even as a woman pastor, is the game, which one of those things don't belong? Because when I see a lot of pastors, I'm like, they look like they got it all together. Like they do look like they have it all together. And I'm not afraid to say, I don't have this all together. And so it makes people nervous, though, when you hear a pastor say, I'm struggling with this or that, because they don't want to know leadership is struggling. It unnerves them. It destabilizes people when the leader is struggling. They feel destabilized. And so, it takes a lot of courage to not look like you've got it all together. Just like it would take courage for a man in a relationship to come forward and saying, my wife is beating me.
That's a
People are
good
like, what?
analogy, actually, yes.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And that's I kind of attribute it to the same. There really is no permission in some denominations to say, you know, I'm really depressed.
Mhm.
I'm really suffering from depression. Like
Yeah.
in our denomination, I mean, I haven't walked in that circle for long, but I've never heard one pastor say that. In other denominations that I associate with, I have heard that, but not with, I haven't heard that in ours.
Mhm.
Marilyn, have
have
you heard that?
pastor, yeah, I have. I was at one meeting where, but it was ministers retreat. So, you know, just think of that setting, right? The people that were there participating, they were all in leadership. They were either ministers' wives or they were pastors of some sort. And the speaker got up and he was just revealing his heart. And you could just see it all over his face, his posture, his voice, everything. And he was saying he said, you know, I'm struggling, I'm discouraged. He used those words. And there was silence. There was silence, right? And you could just feel that silence, like you're saying, like it was like, what? You're not supposed to be saying that. But then
Exactly.
other people applauded him and said, good for you for saying that. Amen. Because you're obviously human. You're not a God pastor. You are, you know, you're the under shepherd, using all that kind of a lingo. But we're, like Sister Joy said, we don't have permission to get up. I've been a pastor's wife for 20 years, and I know if I don't feel well for whatever reason, I get dressed, I still go to church, and I'm smiling, but I'm crushed inside because I'm tired. I can think back to the days when I was working and I've got a night shift. I worked all night. I'm exhausted. I haven't slept.
Mhm.
And I went to church and I have to be happy
You're
because
kind
that's
of breaking up there. You're breaking up there. You're breaking up.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, now. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to be happy because you know, the congregation, the congregants, they're expecting me to come, you know, and be happy and hear all their woes. And I'm just, oh my gosh, I am so tired.
Which is what I was alluding to when I said we have an expectation. Now, when I say we, because I mean, I don't know, but I'm just saying we as in a very generic sense. We have an expectation that our leaders, whether it's our leaders at work, we probably don't give them permission to have a down day. You're the boss. Behave yourself. Perk up, right? So we do that as well on a spiritual level as well. When I look at the pastor, or you know, somebody looks at Joy or your husband or Krista's brother and is like, "What's your problem? You're a man of God." So for whatever reason, it's just one of those things. It's how we look at you in leadership. We look at presidents, we look at political leaders in the same light. If they make a mistake, we don't allow it. Does that make sense? I mean, this is how the world views leaders and leadership. It's almost like you're not human. You're not allowed to be feeling these things. And if you are feeling it, you need to hide it. And it's not right. Right. And as she said, as Joy said, the permission isn't there. It's like a child looking at mommy who's got a headache and I don't care. I want my dinner. Right.
Well,
I'm gonna.
yeah, right. Well, I mean, Elijah, after he did the wonderful miracle at the altar with the false prophets, right? He ran away from
He did.
Jezebel. You know
But
that
how do we
story.
look at that
And he
story?
was absolutely depressed. He said, take me, God. I'm the only one living for you right now.
Yes.
And, you know, he had to be. And so how was he helped, right? You know, I think about Jesus in the flesh. He was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he took, you know, the ones into the garden, into that inner place. They fell asleep and left him, and he's there praying till blood drops, till sweat comes down his face like blood, as the Bible describes. I mean, that must have been pretty tough. So we do have an expectation, you're right. But I don't know, how do we deal with it? I think from my experience, you have your board members, and you have that inner circle of people. It might only be one or two people that you can possibly trust and share your heart to. You're still guarded, you're still careful, and let them know how you feel. And I mean, and that comes with time, and with working with the group that you are privileged to work with. Those that you can say, I feel like this.
Well, one of the articles was talking about the support that that tier of leadership engages and should have. There should be a support as well, whether it's a large body of believers or not.
Mm-hmm.
You're human, so there has to be a support, because the mental health issue is also very prevalent and apropos at that level. Joy, I'm going to yield to you and hear what you have to say further as the pastor of a church.
I think it's so critical that you find a place of support. I mean, usually in the workplace, right, we go up for support. When they teach you, you don't go down, right? If you're a hierarchical thinker, I'm more of a linear thinker myself, but you will go to the people that are above you. But I think it's critical that you do find a circle of support, people who can pray with you, people who you can talk to, that you can be transparent with. And be able to talk to, and it may not be somebody in your congregation. Oftentimes it may not be, but it might be another pastor. Or if it's not there, develop that circle of support where 2 or 3 or 4 pastors can get together, people that you trust, people that you can be candid and transparent with. And to say, here's a situation I'm really struggling with or whatever. Because when we look at, and I know people don't want to talk about this stuff, but when you look at what is happening in Christendom right now, and some of the places that pastors are finding themselves, some of the compromising situations that pastors are finding themselves in, the question is, how did they get there? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when there's struggles and stresses and mental health issues, and it's going to surface somewhere. It's going to come up
Absolutely.
and if it's not in a healthy way that you can deal with situations that are affecting you, next thing you know, you're going to be on TV, right? Being accused of all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
And so I think that our mental health is so important, and forming that circle of support that you can find people, maybe not in your own congregation, maybe across the way, to be able to say, here's what I'm struggling with. Do you have any ideas about this? Or, or even in your own prayer. Like sometimes prayer is a powerful tool, but sometimes we're so busy praying King James prayer that, you're just like, who are you talking to? That was the Rose of Sharon and the Lily of the Valley. We don't even know what that is. Why not just say, Lord, I'm really having a tough time today. Not distress. But we've gotten so the royal we, not everybody, of course, but Christendom has gotten so used to, for whatever reason, that this is how we do it, as opposed to really saying, our Father. Like, Daddy, I'm really stressed out. Daddy, I don't know what to do with this. I'm really bothered. I can't find the balance, right? Like in my own personal life, I'm trying to find the balance right now. I have 2 little kids. Sister Marilyn, when you say you're retired, I think, oh my goodness, I'm on the Freedom 95 plan. That's what happens when you have kids at 41 and 45. Like, I'll never retire. I'll be dead or the rapture before any of that happens. But anyhow, like, I think, like, how do I find this balance, right? And so I'm like, okay, so are there other women pastors that have young kids? Because I haven't figured it out. I just haven't. I feel like I'm juggling it and all the balls are in the air. But I'm kind of comfortable with my own failures and my own imperfections, so I can talk about this publicly. But lots of people can't. It's pretty hard to do that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I learned, Sister Joanna, is, I mean, I went through the stage where I was a young pastor's wife. I mean, I didn't marry a pastor, right? I didn't. He was a saint, and God, in time did what he did. So our children were quite young, and we were actually doing what we call home missions. And I'm hoping, Krista, we're not um, using Christian jargon that you don't understand, but starting a church from scratch. I mean, that's a lot of work. Working with people, and you're trying to visit them, and you're trying to do all these things. But one of the things that I really got from my time of prayer was ministry begins at home. And so, because ministry is serving. So I said, wait a minute, I need to learn how to serve my family first and to be available for them. Because if I don't do that, I'm going to lose them. But that didn't come immediately. I was able to see that with time. And then, of course, as I kept going, as I kept praying, like you said, prayer is a powerful thing. I was saying that to my daughter today, that the power of prayer, you cannot overestimate that. Then the Lord speaks to your heart, and it's not necessarily an audible voice, but it's the inner feelings, it's the inner voice that you hear, that things that you need to do. And so as I would do those things and follow that, he helped me. I was still working. And like I said, the shift work was not an easy thing, but somehow God helped me to be able to, to manage it, to be able to prioritize where I needed. So this needs to be done first. This needs to be, and have that kind of a sequence and give myself to that. So, you have to be very intentional. You have to be very aware that this is what I need to do. And like you said, and be happy with your failures in the sense that, okay, I didn't do this right, not well, but I'm learning from it. And what did I learn? What can I do better? And that was my journey. So now when I, am asked to talk to young pastors, I see their excitement and their exuberance, and I'm very happy for them because I remember I was once there, but I caution them, but I don't do it to discourage them. I just say, be aware that these things you must take care of. Your home is a very precious place. And if you go back to scripture, the home was instituted first, right? And then from the home, we build a church. That's why I said ministry begins at home. So these are the tips and the things, the nuggets that I share with those that are coming up.
Thank you, Sister Marilyn. That's great wisdom. Thank you.
It's beautiful. I loved all of that. It's very okay. So, Krista, I don't want to leave you out of the conversation because it feels like you're no longer a part of the discussion. But I want to ask you specifically if you're still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, how did your brother cope or deal with or manage the levels of stress that come with ministry during the pandemic and post pandemic? Did he share any of that with you, or?
Yeah, what's very interesting in all this is I think my brother is on the verge of burnout or is in that state at this time. During the pandemic, July 2020, his wife left him. And so he's been going through separation, divorce, and it's in a small community. And so they still live in the same community. And she ended up marrying someone in the community that they see each other. And so not only did he face that, but there were a lot of funerals. He did a lot of funerals over the pandemic, and he's got a full-time job on top of that. And so I really think at this point he is in a vulnerable state, and I'm concerned for him. But one way he copes with it is he's very open and honest with his parishioners. And so he'll tell them, I'm not doing well. I'm depressed. I haven't moved on. I think what's really important in this process for him is he doesn't know if he ever will move on, because that he married with the intention that this is going to be the rest of his life, and it didn't work out like that, and he's struggling with that. And so
So,
mm,
so I don't want to cut you off. I just did, but I want to just mention quickly that, I mean, that's a very sensitive share that you've just put out there about your brother. So I'm hoping he's not going to be so angry with you for doing that. But
no, I don't think he will, because actually, just to add one part, someone close to him the other day called him on it and said, "You're a priest, you're supposed to forgive." And we were
there
having
you
a
go.
conversation about this yesterday, and I said, you know, um, it's not authentic to say I forgive if it's not really in your heart. And yes, of course, we look to our spiritual leaders for that example, but I think that there's humility in being authentic and saying this is where I'm at in my journey and I'm not doing well. And so
I
I,
think,
I applaud
right.
his
Love
authenticity in
him.
it.
Well, I do too. And I just think back to what Joyce said earlier about, depending on the religious organization that you belong to, some things will never be brought to the light. And others in other organizations, they're comfortable with being transparent. I just wanted to read this quickly. One of the articles from was called, "Why Are So Many Religious Leaders Facing Stress and Burnout?" And this was called "The Brink" by the Boston University. There was an article, and here's what it said, in keeping with what you're dealing with right now, Krista, your brother's dealing with. "We see a lot of direct exposure to suffering. People in religious leadership get to be with folks in really wonderful times in life, but what's sometimes underrated is the amount of direct exposure to suffering, difficult losses, deaths, existential crises, and often with a kind of unpredictability to it. They can get called in at a moment's notice, etc., etc., etc." So I wanted to deal with the pandemic because during the pandemic, a lot of this surfaced. And so Marilyn and Joy, if I can call you by your first names for a minute, what did you find? Did you find that during this period, a lot of stresses, as listed in this article, sort of increased? And how did you deal with it? A lot of psychological issues came up from parishioners, and they wanted you to become that, the solution, the psychologist. How do we deal with these things? How did you deal with it? Or did you have to deal with it?
Well, for us, I know that the mandates were a problem for some of our, congregants. Like they thought that that was wrong to be mandated to wear a mask and that type of thing. The way that I know that my husband dealt with that, he'd go back to scripture to talk about that we are required as citizens to obey the laws of the land and to pray for our leaders so that we can lead a peaceful life. That was the approach that he took, as there was lots of debates, left and right and all over. And so, we pointed it to scripture. And again, we'd say, well, we do have free will, but things are for the good of the majority. And, it's, that's the way we approach it. Let's just say it like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That was certainly similar to how we did this, Sister Marilyn, is I'm just a firm believer, as the scripture says, that you obey the law of the land as long as it doesn't contravene the law of God, and pray for leaders, and that they may make good decisions. And so, the congregation, thank God, came in line with that. And I think some of the stressful things were, this was corporate trauma, right? It's one thing when you're dealing with maybe a funeral or a death, but you're not a part of it. But this is corporate trauma. COVID, everybody was in this together. It's kind of like the fire that happened up in Fort McMurray, where everybody is traumatized at the same time. And that was tiring in many ways, and being so nimble that at any given minute you were back online. You were 5 in the church, 10 in the church, 15 in the church. Oh no, everybody's out of the church. And so just being able to make those calls off the cuff and not being able to be planful. And thank God people really appreciated the fact and was quite nimble. I think that when we talk about corporate trauma, the difficulty with leadership is even when you're in it, you still have to lead.
Right.
And I remember at one point at the October 2020, when lots of people in our congregation had COVID, and what they would do, they would call me, I've tested positive, because people were afraid. We were afraid of COVID. The 2020, remember it hit in March. So in November, lots of people were dying. If you turn on and watch the States, anywhere, China, people were dying like by the dozens, by the hundreds. And I remember that it was in October or somewhere along there that it just went through our church. People did get COVID at the church, but there was an outbreak at work. And so lots of our members were affected. At the same time, not only did my family come down with COVID, including myself and my husband, but my 82-year-old mother. And I remember sitting on the side of the bed and just feeling completely like overwhelmed, because I am concerned about the people that God has given me to lead. I'm praying for them. I'm concerned about them. And I'm like, my heart is breaking for these people who are sick and so sick. But at the same time, I'm sick. My husband's sick. My mother is sick. And I remember praying and saying, Lord, please don't take my mother at this time. Because I felt like if that happened, it would be like too much to be having to deal with, to be able to support the congregation with prayer and checking in and making sure everybody has what they need, and my mother to die. And I remember God spoke to my spirit and said, I am not merciless. I remember it so clearly. I am not merciless. And I remember just sitting there and thinking, what am I going to do? And the Spirit of God just spoke to me and said, listen, you better get a hold of me, because Calvary is not coming. Like whoever you're expecting to come to help you is not. You have better get a hold of me. And that was so clear that I had to just lean into God, because everybody was in crisis, and had to just lean into God, like put my full weight on God and just let him carry me, carry my family, and give me the strength to be able to support the people in our congregation that was really going through a tough time.
It's interesting that you should say that, because I'm just staring at these words on my research papers that I've read. And this one says, the COVID crisis turned leaders into shock absorbers for the trauma of the flock.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, you had to be there for the people as well as to take care of yourself. Because my husband came down with COVID, I did not. And when he sent an email out to tell everyone, I was like, that kind of but again, the Lord gave us the strength. And I mean, he wasn't deadly sick, but he was sick. He was sick for about 10 days. And so, we had to pull through. I mean, church was online, and thank God for the support of the congregation. So there was others to step up and to help. But, how's pastor? Like they're wondering. But, he survived. He did fine. But at the beginning, I was even traumatized at the beginning. I was like, oh my God, what's happening? What's happening in my house? Like that type of thing. But with the help of the Lord, I was able to cope with that. So that article is right.
Okay, I want to just sort of wrap this up with two statements that might be controversial in terms of, I don't know if I said ambiguous statement or not, but the quote is, burnout, in terms of a spiritual burnout is what happens when our inner walk with God isn't sufficient to sustain our outer walk for God. And the second statement is, we can look at this as a gift from God in the sense that it's an invitation from God to be closer to him.
Mm.
Any thoughts, response?
Well, I want to be with God, not necessarily for God. I mean, we really get into language here. And Krista, are you a language instructor? Splitting hairs?
She is, actually.
There you go. I
Yes.
kind of thought so. Because to me, the words then with, like he's with me, I'm with him, and he's my strength. When I think of for, I mean, we are ambassadors for the kingdom of God, but I don't want to err just completely there, because then I'm not his replacement, if I can put it out like that, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you make that statement again, Sister Sharon? I'm just.
Yeah. So the statement, the quote is, and actually I'll just make a reference to who said it. Sean Nemec, who is he works with ministers in crises. Okay. So I think he made this very controversial statement as far as I'm concerned. And he says, when I'm talking with pastors, I usually say burnout is what happens when our inner walk with God isn't sufficient to sustain our outer work for God.
I don't know if I'm in full agreement with that. I don't know if I'm in full agreement that our inner walk with God is not sufficient to sustain our outer walk with God. The reality is, Jesus said something Jesus said everything profound, but he said, all that the Father has given me to do, that I do. And I think that I don't know this, but I wonder if, we could be doing as leaders a lot of things that God has not given us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So our outer walk with God may not be in line with what God has actually given us to do. So it doesn't, so there may be a misalignment between what we've been given the strength to do and what we're actually doing, as opposed to some deficiency in our relationship with God. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So I think that it's important for us to sometimes, when we look at burnout as leaders, to say, what has the Father given me to do? And I know I have to ask that question all the time. What has the Father given me to do? And is that what I'm doing? And then God will always sustain you for what he's given you to do. But I wonder, I don't know, I make no accusation or judgment, but I wonder if sometimes as leaders, we're doing more than God has given us to do.
Mm.
And why would that be?
We're acting like we're for, that's why I was saying,
Yes.
You could see me, I'm nodding because I'm thinking, yeah, we're not in place of God, right? Are we? We want him to be with us. And if he's with us, we're doing, like Paul says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. We're doing the things that he requires of us, that he wants us to do.
So, I just want to throw this in real quick. In law, there is a thing, contributory negligence. So perhaps what you're experiencing, your loss, or the negativity or of an experience, is not necessarily someone else's fault or doing, but part of it is yours.
I look at it as a fallen world as opposed to fault, right? I look at it as a fallen world, and we're not. I would hope that as leaders, we're trying to come in alignment. We're trying to come in alignment with God. We're trying to come in alignment to do what He has called us to do, as opposed to saying that this is our fault or not our fault, or whose fault is it, or but to really, we are on a journey to come into complete alignment with the will of God for our lives, for our calling, for what He's called us to do. As opposed to, sort of, we've caused this on ourselves.
But if you, well, basically what I'm trying to say is any loss or suffering that you are experiencing, if you're not really in tune with what God is asking you to do, requiring of you, and you're doing more than you are needing to do, that's the contribution to your suffering, and that's on you.
Well, yes, I mean, certainly if you're out of sync with the will of God, that's definitely on you, right? It just, that statement lands very heavy, Sister Sharon. Right?
It's not mine. I'm just, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it lands very heavy, because then it's obviously if you walk out of sync with God, and I know the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes.
But I think for a lot of leaders, it's we care a lot. Maybe not that we care too much, that's not what I'm saying, but we care a lot, and sometimes that caring gets in the way, but it impacts us actually saying, Lord, what is it you want me to do? What is it you're calling me to do? What is it that you would have me to do, as opposed to me trying to because I mean, all of us that are online, we care. We care about people, right? That's why we do what we do. We care about
right.
Yeah.
And so,
and it's interesting that all of your professions, your careers, it was very caring, so about caring about the well-being of others. And the parallel in ministry is it's the same. And so you can overdo it. Am I on a...
I agree with you 100% that we
Right.
could overdo it, and we often do, right?
Yeah.
We often overdo it, but I think that if we're looking at not blame, but if we're looking at responsibility, I think we also have to have a responsibility to let those people around us know that, yes, we're called to lead, but we also have needs. We're not
Right.
infallible, and that there's things that we need to take care of. We can't be available 24/7. Sometimes it's people's expectations. Sometimes it's expectations that we have of ourselves. But I think that this is a journey that we're trying to traverse. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but we course correct as we go along, as we lean into Jesus and He speaks more to us, and we learn obedience. We learn inconvenient obedience, right?
Right. And what I hear from all of this is balance. What I take from this is balance. Balance is important. Learning when to be able to negotiate a yes and a no, and not being afraid, to be able to step back, whether it's on a temporal level or a spiritual level. Balance. I don't have I have no answers. I'm here to learn as well from all of you, from your experiences. And I'm going to ask Krista to offer a final word.
Yeah, something that was coming to mind as I was listening is also in my capacity as an instructor, I model what I hope students can bring forth into the world. And Gandhi's quote always comes to mind, I'm the change that I want to see in the world. it's not so much in my words, but in my actions that can make that profound difference and impact on them. And I think, if I'm putting myself at the mercy of the violence of overwork, and yet I'm talking to students saying you have to find balance and put yourself first, how authentic is that teaching to them? And so I think one thing that I take with me, people who I see walking the spiritual path really in line with Christ's teachings, or whatever their understanding of a higher power's teachings are, is it's not what we say, it's what we do. So I really, when I feel like I'm in a situation where it's not in alignment with those core beliefs or values, that I owe it to myself and to those around me to walk away with grace and say, this is not in the best interests of myself. And I think, I guess everybody has different tolerance levels of what they will and will not allow. But if anything, these last 2.5 years have taught me that I know what my limits are, and I'm glad to have those limits.
Thank you so much. Final words, Marilyn?
Well, balance, as you say, that comes to mind. And I think if there's anything that, I'm still learning, even though I'm retired, is to balance, because I don't want to take on too much volunteer work so that I'm overwhelmed. I just want to take enough that I can manage and that I can enjoy. And that's what I'm experiencing right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I will yield to Joy with a request. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree with both Marilyn and Krista. The word is balance. And I speak to our congregation a lot about that, especially to young families, even though I grapple with that myself. I'm grappling with it along with them, that you have to find that balance. It is not God's will for us to be exhausted. Even Jesus said, come aside, let's get some rest,
Absolutely.
And so it's about finding that balance. And I'm persuaded that as I continue to seek for that I will find that. And I think it's critical in order to be healthy, emotionally healthy as a leader, that we do find that balance.
That's right. Thank you all so very much. I know that time is a precious and a rare commodity when we have all the responsibilities that we do have. I'm just going to close this program with a scripture. I think it's Psalms 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. So thank you all for your sharing and your willingness to, put it out there. I think we've all learned from each other, and I think the listeners will appreciate all that we have expressed this evening. So God bless you, and I will definitely call on you again.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Joy and Marilyn. It's been a pleasure.
Mine too. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed myself immensely.
Thank you so much for sharing. I've learned so much. I was just putting in the chat. I've learned so much from everyone. And thank you, Sister Marilyn, for your words of wisdom. As a young mom with children, that's been very helpful to me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
All right. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.